Title of his talk today is Marketing and Sales Working Together in the new post-COVID world. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited to hear his talk. Let me tell you a little bit about Tom. Tom holds the Richard S. Reynolds Professorship in Business Administration at the University of Virginia, the Darden School of Business. He also serves the school as Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Development. He is the course head for the first year marketing course in the MBA program, and he's the faculty chair for Strategic Sales Management Program and Executive Education. Prior to joining Darden, he taught at the Harvard Business School, where he was the faculty chair of the Business to Business Marketing Strategy Program and Exec Ed. Steenburgh is an expert in business to business marketing and sales, and he believes that academics should engage with business leaders to solve real world problems. He co-founded the Thought Leadership on the Sales Profession Conference, which provides a unique opportunity for leading academics and senior business leaders to discuss current issues in sales. He frequently speaks about his research at companies and in public forums, including the Global Siemens One Conference, the Money Management Institute, the Sales Management Association, and the Strategic Account Management Association. His research analyzes the effectiveness of sales and marketing strategies. He holds a master's degree in statistics from the University of Michigan and a PhD in marketing from Yale University. Please welcome Tom Steenburgh. Tom?
Thanks, Randy. That's very kind introduction. I appreciate it. So today I'm going to talk about a few things. In particular, I'm going to talk about working together, sales and marketing working together, I would say, to thrive in a post-COVID world. It's been a crazy year and a half, as I told our faculty when we were making the transition to teach online and to work in this new environment. It's a gift to see the world in a new way. And we should make use of that as much as possible. And so what I'm going to talk about here is some connections that I see between my research in selling new products and my research in sales and marketing organizations working together, and what that might mean. I'll speculate a bit about what that might mean in the future. And I'll ask us all to sort of learn from each other and engage in a discussion about where we think things are going. Nobody knows for sure, but I think we've learned a lot in the last year and a half. I personally have learned how much I like seeing people, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the future. But there's some other things I think that we can take with us from the past year and make use of that in the future. So that's the kind of the goal today, to talk a bit about how I see that changing. I'll start by just going back to how things were pre-COVID. And I think at that time, we still thought like the world was really busy. There are lots of things going on. It was, we thought it was turbulent then. It's more turbulent now. But the way the world had been changing, we had moved from a world where there was less competition, where it was easy to see what customers' preferences were. Decisions were relatively simple. Most of our marketing and sales were outbound, to a world where it was harder to do all of those things. Consumers had more particular preferences. They seemed to change more quickly. The decisions seemed very complex. You're competing with companies from all over the world. I spent an early part of my career at Xerox. We always felt like we had a couple of years ahead of the competition, which is typically Kodak in the high end of our market, to make money. And then that diminished, over the last 25 years. Now you'd say, like, if you have 3 months of a lead on a competitor, that would have been a lot, just before COVID. And so it moved you from a mindset of where you could make long-term decisions and you might earn money immediately because you could price really high, to one where you're always trying to count dollars and you're thinking about customer lifetime value. It moved you from a world where technology really wasn't all that complex to a world that was hyper technology. So even prior to COVID, if we can go back and remember those times, it seemed like there was a lot of turbulence. And I'd say the last, year and a half has really upset that even more. Let's see. If, yeah, another big trend that had happened along with those transformations in the background was in the old world, seller had a lot of power. And you can think of just car buying as, as one way to put in that perspective. If you wanted to learn about a car, and you're thinking 25 years ago, 25 years ago, you had to go to a seller, and the salesperson controlled a lot of the information. How you learned about that car was on the lot. So the seller had an awful lot of power. And what you'd do is you'd sell features and benefits, new products. You spend a lot of time thinking about the product, and your role at the on the lot was to give that information and to try and put the customer in a headlock, so to speak, and not let them walk off the lot without a car. And right before COVID, we'd say the buyer was getting a lot more power. And part of that has to do with technology, the leveling of the playing field with the internet. And that caused a lot of problem with sellers. You could feel companies trying to figure out, like, how do I get that power back? How do I make myself relevant in the current world? And I can think of a few examples of companies doing that, but that too is creating a lot of disruption pre-COVID. I'd say one of the trends that I was interested in, and one of the reasons I wrote a case to get a better understanding of how companies were getting power back and navigating those choppy waters, was I was in thinking about this. I went to HubSpot and I wrote a case to try and figure out how a company could think about capturing customer attention, regaining some power from customers in a world that's sort of roiled by technology. And one of the really interesting things that HubSpot talks about, and HubSpot, if you don't know, is they pioneered the concept of inbound marketing. It's creating a presence on the web where customers come to you. They liken it to fishing as opposed to hunting for customers, right? You lure the customer to you and they come and find you. But one of the trends that they've identified is this greater convergence of sales and marketing, a greater dependence on of the two organizations, how they should work together more, how sales, they would even argue, sales should drive their hiring strategy, dependent on the type of marketing they're doing, and the type of conversion. So there's more alignment between sales and marketing teams. There's more working together. And you could see that at HubSpot, and which typically has a smaller customer base. And you could see that somewhat in big companies too. I've done a lot of work on key account management. And in those organizations, the sales typically has perhaps a little more power in the really big companies like that, and the strategic accounts. But they would talk about working with marketing and working with people more upstream to try and nurture a customer through the sales funnel. And we sort of saw a trend of companies trying to get these organizations to work together and to regain some of that power that customers were taking from them through the democratization of the internet. And then COVID happened. And I think it's really interesting what this crisis has done, because it's a disruption in the way that we do business. I think there's two really big things that sort of makes it difficult for companies to continue to thrive, to continue to work together. And two big factors I'd say that go into this. One is COVID has caused us or moved us into a world where everyone's really isolated. So if one of the ways that companies were trying to get power back from customers was by working together, by having sales and marketing organizations be more integrated, COVID's sort of thrown a monkey wrench into some of that, because we're spending more time alone. It's just harder to communicate with people. Even when you get together, In Zoom meetings, they're less efficient in many ways. Maybe you get 70% of the information out in the same amount of time as you get out in a live meeting. It's enabled some other things too, which I'll talk about later, but there's just greater isolation that works against creating that teamwork. And then there's also just greater uncertainty. We don't exactly know what the world's going to look like when we come out of the COVID crisis. We can take some educated guesses. And we can think about some of the things that we can build upon. But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's areas of the economy that have been decimated by the crisis. And if those are your customers, you have to think about, how do I attract a new set of customers? How am I going to thrive in the future? And there's just uncertainty of how we'll work together. And you see people talking about the new world of work, how companies are going to work together, but also how we're going to work with customers. So what I thought we'd do at the start of the talk here is just talk with each other a little bit about those two issues. And then we can come back and share share what's going on in your company. And then I'll go and talk about what the research says about navigating times of uncertainty and keeping learning in times of uncertainty. But the two questions I'd like you to go and talk about in your breakout groups are the following. One, have you found new ways to coordinate, or maybe not even new ways? Have you found ways to coordinate with others, both your colleagues, so internal relationships that you have, and coordinate with your customers, external relationships that you have, despite the isolation that we're working in now? And second, I'd like you to talk about, have you found ways to keep learning despite the uncertainty? Now, the answer to those questions might be no, we haven't. It's been a real problem for us. The answers might be we found some novel ways to overcome things. On the whole, maybe it's not great, but we have some bright spots. I'll leave that to you to share among yourselves. But I'd just like to spend about, let's say, 10 minutes in breakout groups to talk about these two issues. We can come back and share, and then I'll tie together some of the work that I've done in new product development. And some of the work I've done in learning here at Darden, and to give a basis of some things that I see going on. So why don't we go to breakout groups now? So Lynn, if you could move people to that for the next 10 minutes, that'd be great. And then we'll come back.
Great. So Lori and I are on that. You'll be encouraged, folks, to go to a breakout room where there'll be about 8 of you in there. I encourage you to introduce yourselves. You'll have 8 to 10 minutes. And remember these two questions. Have you found ways to coordinate? And have you found ways to keep learning? And Laura, you can toss me in one of those rooms too, just to, I can monitor from that side, and Tom will watch from the outside.
I'm just curious, here, maybe get a few people to comment on how well your company, how well you think your company's adapted to the changes, both good and bad. Maybe we could take one or two people. Lynn, could you help me with that too?
This is Dave Loomis, and we had a great breakout session. But the interesting thing was that there was sort of a contrarian view that people loved Zoom, and people were more efficient and working really well with it, and really didn't want to go back to work. And they thought that, the sales and marketing coordination was actually better than it was before. So, I think you referenced that there were some advantages that you were going to talk about, but
yeah,
maybe people are seeing those.
Dave, could you give an example or two of how things have gotten better? That's great.
Well, boy, at my clients, it was sort of hard to get sales and marketing together because their schedules were so busy, and salespeople were always on the road and always at a customer. And now they're more available. They're actually more available to join Zoom. And somebody in our breakout mentioned, well, instead of going to customers, they'll send the customer a pizza, and then they'll have a virtual pizza party. But we also heard a little bit about inbound marketing at our session, and Luke Patterson was mentioning how it's easily coordinated, maybe even more so than before.
That's great.
Maybe
It's
a
great to hear
different,
some
a different
success stories
perspective.
with this too.
Yeah, let me share a little, maybe the opposite perspective from a subgroup of employees who we have to think about, and that is people who are new into these companies. And we had two examples. One of the people in the breakout, they got a new chief revenue officer. You know, the top person in charge of all of sales, brand new, has been with the company only a year, and nobody has met that person.
Yeah.
You know, none of the sales organization has met the person, and yet they're trying to exert their leadership and drive revenue. And then another example was more of a people like us, people who are put into who have been hired new into roles within the company and have never been able to meet any of their peers. And so I guess there was some discussion about what are we doing to adapt to this reality. And some companies are actually tagging on extra time at the end of internal Zoom calls for newer people to hang out afterwards and ask a lot of questions and get to know each other a little better and socialize, because that's a part that is missing right now until we can all get back together live. And we talked about engagement in the company, and it reminded me of Jamie Dimon from Morgan Stanley this morning came out and said he wants everybody back in the office now that the guidelines have been lifted. And he says our most engaged employees are anxious to come back to the office. And so he kind of set out a subtle signal to all the Morgan Stanley employees is, if you want to be considered an engaged employee, we expect you back in the office. I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting, Rand. I'll build on something you said too. One of the things that I've heard from companies is that there might be some turbulence with the new employees. I think that you hit the nail on the head with that one. It's tougher for them. I'm hearing some things that newer employees that joined right as COVID hit are more likely to transition to new roles. And I think it's that affiliation or feeling like this has been a good experience with them, with this company. It's been challenging for many people. So I think that's great that you brought that up. I think Lou would like to make it.
Hi, good morning, Tom.
Hey, Lou.
In our breakout session, we touched upon a couple observations of how coordination among the teams kind of evolved since the pandemic. I work in a team with not so many new folks. We've kind of been a solidified team, but going through a lot of change as we came together with Dow and DuPont, and then have subsequently merged the Nutrition and Bioscience division into IFF back here in February. So a lot of change organizationally, not necessarily team person-wise. And, for us, it seems like 7 a.m. or even 6:30 a.m. in some cases is the new 8 a.m., right? So we're definitely applying that time and trying to be productive to the corporation. And also what we've observed is, for longer term colleagues of actually formally setting up catch-up meetings, kind of informal catch-up meetings to make sure that, us key functional leaders are connecting and keeping up that relationship that would have been facilitated through physically being together, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if others are starting earlier and, finding maybe a longer and longer day alone with the screen.
I know I am, Lou. So I feel your pain on that.
And we talked about that as a kind of a trade-off. If we go back to the office, it's, hey, we kind of get back to 8 o'clock, right? And 7:30. Otherwise, we're, for us with longer commutes, we might be leaving at 5 a.m., right? To keep that schedule up. So I think it's going to be an interesting trade-off as we go into this transition next quarter, coming back to work. So thanks.
Ralph?
Yeah, Tom, good to see you. Good to see you too, Lou. Good breakout session here. In addition, though, getting to we had a good session, didn't quite get around to everyone. Sorry about that. But the idea that, one of the folks talked about really, getting to the heart of the question that was asked. They set up regular listening sessions and apparently had found a formula for listening sessions that just took a cut across their customers and employees. Just to listen and really just to hear what was going on and processing not just what was going on in the business space, but what was going on emotionally. The other thing is now we're in the sort of the great, we're going to come back thing. Will we come back, all at once, or will we come back on alternative days? So prioritizing, what do you do with that comeback time? One of the people in our breakout session has someone working for them through the whole COVID thing that they haven't had the chance to meet face to face. And I think this has happened to several people. So prioritizing that time where they can begin to, hey, when we do get back, let's prioritize how we're going to use that time to make sure that, we fill in the blanks on the face to face. And then, that the idea that through all this, I guess we've all, whether we like it or not, have gotten better at this kind of communication.
Yeah.
In terms of, the rules, the etiquette, who steps on who doesn't, do you leave, one of the people brought up the idea that we're used to leaving blanks in the conversation so that people can jump in and make these communications richer. And then there are just some straightforward things. One of our team just said, look, we're using a lot more webinars to communicate with people, that we are just turning on the channel and making the channel, more rich in terms of communication. So some good discussion. It would be very interesting to see, and I know Jerry Katz probably has some insight on this, on what do you do to create a good listening session? How do you schedule it? What's the objective? Is there, what really do you ask? What do you not ask? I have a feeling I guess it was the folks at one of our member firms was doing this, and that would be a good thing, I think, to share practice on.
Yeah. I don't know, Jerry, if you want to comment now or if you'd like to wait. I think the idea of being intentional about your communication and focusing on the emotional side of things, like making space for that's really important. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Jerry.
Well, the only thing I would add, and I wasn't going to cover this in my talk, I found in teaching, and there's been wide agreement with this, we make it mandatory that people be on camera. What I find is if they're not on camera, it's too easy to be checking your email or trying to multitask. And when you're on camera, there's no guarantee that you're plugged in, but I just find you're more plugged in. Also, if it's a small group, it's easier to do discussion without the tools of the online hand raising. Literally, people just raise their hand and start to speak. I imagine those of you who teach full time have a lot more to say about this than I do, but I think being on camera is really kind of urgent.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jerry. And I'm actually at the end of my talk, I'll talk some about how we establish a learning environment and some of the things that we've learned at Darden about creating that environment where people can learn and engage with each other. So I think those are great points that you're making. Thank you. So in the interest of time, why don't I move ahead now and talk a bit about, how I've thought about the change, and how some observations I'll make with other things that we know. So, and some of the things that I've found really helpful in managing the environment and have been helpful with other companies as well. If you think of change environments and how people manage them, we're used to this in sales and marketing in lots of ways, because when you sell new products, there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to go on. And it gives us a way to think about how to navigate crisis. In some ways, navigating periods of rapid change, we get used to it in sales and marketing as part of our job because of the new products that we want to sell and the constantly changing environment. Mike Ahern and I have done a lot of research on this in the last 10 years or so, just thinking about how to sell new products. And we put together an HBR article. And actually, I drew a lot on that research as I was trying to figure out what to do here at Darden this last year and in working with companies. I did a talk with the group of sales executives a while back, and we shared some insights about the relationship between the two. I thought I'd do the same today. But when we talk about managing uncertainty when selling new products, the best companies have three things. They have the right people, they have the right set of people who can manage times of change. They create the right organization and culture to manage change, and they have the right set of processes to do that. So all three of those things need to be in place. And I'll touch in a little bit on all three as we go through, and then I'll talk about creating this learning environment, how it applies. So one of the most interesting things that we found, or one of the things that I thought was just fascinating when we started our research and started looking for models about how to sell new products and how to navigate, this times of uncertainty, is that we looked at where companies feel confident in their own company's performance and when they feel weak in terms of selling new products. And this chart here, I just think is absolutely fascinating. And it's just been so useful. Yep.
We can't see your charts. Could you just reshare?
Oh, sure. I think I'll be able to do that. Oh, so when you come back from break, it doesn't, must not do that. Is that good now?
That's great. We can see that now.
Yeah. So one of the things that's fascinating about selling new processes, here's a chart that shows where companies feel confident in their internal processes and where they feel like they have problems. And I think you learn a couple of things from this chart. First off, everything that's done internally to the company. So when you talk about selling a new product, there's the development process, there's a selection process, there's an ideation process, and a commercialization process. Everything done early on, there's two features of it. One is that we have all sorts of processes to get products through. We have a process for ideation. We have a process for project selection. We have a process for product development, and it's all done internal to the company. We feel confident when we're doing those things. When we get to commercialization, almost always there's a lack of a process and there's lack of coordination across groups. So it's really fascinating. We have, a stage gate process at many companies in product development. You go through very, very distinct stages. We map it all out. We have groups of people look at a product to figure out whether or not we want to keep moving forward. But once we get to commercializing it, we just throw it over the wall of sales and let them go. There's no process in place. Oftentimes there's no training that gets done, or if the training's done, it's not particularly strong. One of the things that's fascinating is Mike and I were doing this research. I thought it was so interesting. We asked sales organizations, how long did you spend with marketing to coordinate, the launch of your product? How long did marketing stay on post-launch with the product? The median response to that was always 0 months. Like you just throw it over the wall, see if it works, and you'll try and figure it out. So you see this commercialization gap, and there's two charts. There's two data points on this that the gap is huge on, but it's the same thing, really. So you can see engagement with customers to prove real world feasibility. Companies feel the most strong about that part of their process. That's marketing reaching out oftentimes to beta customers to figure out whether or not a product sells. And then you get to commercialization and pilot users. I don't feel good about that process at all. Changes organizations. I don't have a formal process to assess. And there's also some risk of whether or not you're going to make money on it. And there's this huge gap that goes on in selling new products. And you can see, there's a big divide. A lot of companies don't feel good about their commercialization process, and having a process in place. At the best companies, we found there was some process that was put in place. Process matters is one of the things that I take away from that. With respect to people, when we were doing our research about asking, what are the star salespeople, people who are really effective at selling new products, what do they do differently? And one of the things that came across in our research as we talked to people is that the stars, the people who are best at sort of navigating the change, had a different perspective. They had a way to look at the customer and a way to look at other people as opposed to look at the product. So the average salesperson, what do they worry about when a new product comes? Can I describe the product? Do I have the right information about it? They look internally. The stars had a different thing that they're worried about. They're typically looking deeper into the process. They ask, Will the customer be able to evaluate this product? Do I understand what switching costs are going to take place at the customer site? And how strong is the customer's need to maintain the status quo? Can I understand that? If I can understand those things, then I can be effective in selling a new product. So there's in general an other focus. They're really hell-bent on figuring out what's going on at the customer site and not worried about themselves. It's letting go of the ego and in part with that. And I'll pick up on that as we talk more. Another thing that we found with the star salespeople is that they have different traits and characteristics. So these 5 things were all associated with higher sales in terms of new products. One was you had to have product knowledge, of course, that matters. But you also have this other focus or the market focus. So the salespeople needed to have market knowledge and understanding of trends and dynamics in the market, thinking about what's going to happen in the future, not what's happening today. They had a learning mindset, so a desire to improve their abilities and master difficult tasks. I'll show you some data from a research study on that in just a moment, but they adopted a learning mindset. And when they saw the rewards from that is also important, which I'll talk about. Like I said earlier, they had a customer focus. So they looked at customer needs. They could anticipate problems in the buying process, things that typically happen not in the first call, but things that happened in the calls 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 to 12 months out in the sales process. And they were more adaptable, just in general, the most successful salespeople. So to navigate this turbulent sort of world, they had to have an other focus, they had to see in the future, and they had to anticipate different states. I'll show you a study that was done that looked at the importance of the learning mindset. And this is both good and bad news, I'd say. Difficult to manage, but good, good to know. And so if you look at new product sales over time, and this would actually be sales in general of a rep who's got new products in their bag over time. This is what tends to happen. So you introduce the new product at Y0. What happens early on? Well, instead of going out and cashing business that is just on existing products and keeping that pipeline going, you have to go and train the customer, help them learn something. So you see a dip early, and then over time, as the products become adopted, your overall baseline sales grows through the new products, and your profitability grows too, because profitability of new products is always better than otherwise. If I have a rep with a performance mindset, we split the data set in half, and it's a median split. Some reps are more worried about their sales outcomes. That's a performance mindset. Other reps are more worried about developing their abilities and learning at the customer site. That's a learning mindset. What happens? Well, if I have a performance mindset, I'm going to spend some time selling a new product. So my overall performance dips a little bit. And then it recovers in the long run. It just doesn't recover as high as the baseline because I didn't invest as much in selling new products. Here's the thing that's really interesting though. Customers that engage, or salespeople who engaged in really learning at the customer site, spending time learning this new environment, trying to figure out what works, they suffered a much bigger dip in sales early on, but then their recovery was much better later on. So it took a long time for them to figure out what's going on at the customer site. They really dig in there. And then the good news comes much later on, because after I figure out like what the barriers to adoption are, and I really get into the customer site, then I will get this really big spike in sales in the long run. And this is both good and bad news. The good news is if I adopt this learning mindset, I get something really big later on. The bad news is I'm going to have a deep trough early on that I've got to manage through, and sort of, I don't know if the product's going to be a success, but if I'm going to make it a success, I need to engage at that point. And that's challenging from a leadership perspective to make that happen. But you see the learning mindset really pays off in the long run. If I can adopt that learning mindset is critical in helping to long-term success. The other thing that was interesting about our research is that it's really helpful to get outside perspective when you're trying to develop a training plan. And when you're trying to figure out how to help reps improve, their self-rating isn't all that great. And so some of the things that we did is we did a project where we had the rep rate themselves on some of the key factors. I've just put two of the factors that are out there. Product knowledge is one, and adaptability is another. And when it comes to product, and then the blue is a self efficacy rating that we had with the reps, and the orange is an other efficacy rating. So you ask customers, rate your sales reps' ability on product knowledge, rate your sales reps' ability on adaptability. And you can see really big gaps in terms of what people think are important. So with product knowledge, and something that we as companies typically train an awful lot on when a product is launched, if any training gets done, it's typically on product knowledge. It's very little on sales process or customer and other types of knowledge. And what you see here is both the rep and the buyer both view the salespeople as having great product knowledge, right? And they're really strong on that. What you see on adaptability, though, is that the rep thinks they're being very adaptable, and the buyer thinks they're not doing anything. This is the most fixed mindset person I can see on average. So these are average salespeople, not your star salespeople. Star salespeople would be rated higher on this particular dimension. And what this slide says to me is that it's really important to get outside perspective to kind of figure out where your gaps are as an organization as you develop training plans. The other thing that also came out to be really important, and it gets back to something we said about this COVID environment that I think is another commonality, is that when selling new products, often the challenge happened to be around the salesperson's emotions, not around their knowledge. So it's more about the heart than the head. And one manager that we talked to, I'll just put this one quote, we heard this in variety forums across the interviews we did, was our salespeople would assess the customer's needs and offer appropriate solutions. So they're totally in tune with what needed to be done. But the disruption in the digital market was so overwhelming, they didn't feel clear about what they were supposed to do. They're stuck in place, and until we could get them over that hurdle, they couldn't cope. So to help them cope, we asked them to reflect on what their role was and what it wasn't. We found it was helpful for them to write their thoughts down in a journal. We needed them to recognize that they did not have to be an expert in all things. And in one way or another, one of the things that we heard from an organizational perspective that's important is that help your people manage through this time of uncertainty. And in this case, it's an evolving digital market. In the case now, it's COVID, right? We needed to help them make the problem smaller. We need to say, this is what you're responsible for. You're not responsible for everything. And if you can write down and figure out what to focus on and what you're responsible for, you actually could be effective in the job. So this journaling exercise turned out to be really effective. Another thing that I think is important to think about, and as senior leaders we're responsible for in our organizations, is developing networks to help people learn. And this slide here actually is a way that Siemens thinks about their structure. But what they found in Siemens as they're developing their strategic account management organization is that without the sales management organization, it's just chaos. And the customers and suppliers don't know how to communicate with each other. So they thought about being more thoughtful with that. And the thoughtfulness couldn't be by creating bottlenecks. It's not just one person that could be all things to all people in the organization. They had to create a network. They had to provide some sort of structure that was flexible, let people between the buyer and seller communicate, and provide structure that within the seller side that people could communicate. And so they spent maybe 40% of their time internal developing these types of networks so that we know what's going on at the customer site and that we know what's going on at the R&D site. And you could see people talk about as managing our COVID problems, we need to have more structure in place, both for the emotional things and for the knowledge transfer things. That's important. The other thing that is important is that there's this specific role of senior leaders play. And for those of us who are higher in organization, it becomes more and more important that we show some sort of commitment to customer centricity. So I have this one quote from a senior leader that said, "The involvement of the board shows our commitment to customer centricity. It builds trust between the board and the customer's top executives, and it provides a board more direct view of what the customer wants. This program gives the SAMs further strength via our top management inside and outside the organization." So as you move up in an organization, it means that you have this responsibility, not just to make sure you have the right structures in your own place, but you also create the right structures at the customer site and bring some order to that chaos. Now, those are some of the big picture things that have been on my mind as I've developed our learning organization here at Darden. I've been responsible for helping the faculty migrate to this new environment. I've shared some of this within sales organizations who are trying to teach their salespeople to learn. I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time talking about how to create an effective learning environment in the middle of the crisis. I'll tell you the first thing that I did last spring when we migrated online, which we did in a 2-week time period, was to have a meeting with people to talk about the emotional problems that they're going through. And the first thing I asked was, what are you worried about? And just let people talk. They panicked about all sorts of things. We let them talk, and then we started to move on. And I'll sort of walk you through some of the things that I feel like I've learned about creating this effective learning environment within our organization by managing through this crisis. Some of it will have to do with knowledge. Some of it will have to do with just the emotional things that we were talking about earlier. I think one of the things that's important, and I encourage everyone I work with to think about, is that if you're in the middle of the crisis, or as you start getting into a crisis, you have to think about, what am I worried about? What are the principles that I hold dear and values, and how can I reflect on those and keep those front and center so that people have something to anchor themselves to? So at Darden, one of the things that we really care about is our educational experience. We are all committed to making this an effective educational environment. So, I'd put up the school mission. Darden School improves the world by inspiring responsible leaders through unparalleled transformational learning experiences. And here are our values and principles. We start by reflecting on values and principles because that gives people, they know the world's going to change, but here are the things that we think are key. This is what we're going to focus on keeping, even in this difficult time. After you do that, what we did is put together a roadmap so that we would have a way to learn to navigate. And what I found was really effective in putting together this roadmap for us internally was that people knew, we don't know what we're doing today, but we will figure it out. By the time the students get here in September, we will have a plan so that you're ready to go. I know you care about teaching. Here's what we're going to do to make sure that you're prepared. And our roadmap doesn't really matter exactly what we did, other than to say we had some places that you could prepare yourself. We had some people that would help you on the tech side. We had some people that would help you learn how to teach from a learning design standpoint, and we're going to help each other do that. And we went through demos, we went through learning experiences. The most important thing, I think, was just having a plan so that people felt safe. Because one thing that prevents learning from happening within an organization is just fear. Fear leads to inactivity and people don't work. If you have a plan, people are like, okay, I'm in good hands. By the time I'm not ready today, but by the time the students come, we'll be fine. And within a sales organization, it gives people a way to stay busy, way to keep moving forward, even in the middle of a crisis. The other thing that I think is really important to do is to make problems as small as possible. I think this is true in daily life, but when you're in the crisis, it re-emphasizes the importance of what to focus on. So as we talked about things, we knew that people are going to have to worry about a lot of technology. Some people eat it up like crazy. Some people love it. They'll consume as much technology as they can. They'll try everything. Other people are frozen by it. And so we just always made the problem smaller. The only thing you have to learn about is Zoom. Canvas will take care of you. Just let's worry about Zoom today, then we'll worry about other things tomorrow. And when you see fit, you can start adding things. And the beauty of that is that we started sharing all these different tools, Slack, Google Slides. Let's talk about how we can use this in class. Mentimeter, I'd have people demonstrate things, but you can adopt them just as you see fit, because the technology isn't the most important thing. It's things that can make things better on the margin, but there's some things you really have to learn, like the Zoom. Everything else is just icing on the cake, and you can add it as you feel comfortable. And what you find is that some people just love it, and they love the new environment, and they'll keep growing that. And in fact, their enthusiasm can be infectious. The other thing I think that's really interesting about this environment, and I think will persist, is that collaborative learning is incredibly effective and engaging. And so we found things in class where you could create an exercise and do things that you couldn't do before. It was much easier to send people to breakout groups so they could share things in small groups. And it was much easier for us to create a page that everyone can see, even at disparate locations. And you can move different sticky notes around. You can make the ideas fluid, and we can engage each other even though we're online, and maybe even more effectively in some ways by using some of these digital tools. And I think that we're going to see more of this. I think this one was done on Google Sheets. I mean, the tool itself doesn't matter. There's several ways you can do it. But here's an exercise that one of our faculty put together to get people to collaborate and to share ideas in an engaging sort of fashion. Like I said earlier, the technology should fit to your comfort level. So one of our faculty on the left, you can see her home setup, very rudimentary, just a laptop. She did amazing in the classroom. Another faculty eats technology up, 4 or 5 different monitors, also did amazing in the classroom. But the technology is subservient to what they were doing in the classroom. Because I think the key is that you're only successful if you're confident. So trying to bite off too much is where people got into trouble. If they could keep the technology to within their comfort level, they turned out to be really effective in class. And all the things that we thought were important, like not wearing masks or all being together, turned out to be less important than that, making those emotional connections with people, trying to do things to connect with them before the teaching group, before the session where it happens, or creating space within a session where we connect as people is way more important than the technology itself. The other thing that I found really interesting in working with organizations is that this crisis has provided us an opportunity to reframe the way you present ideas. And like I said earlier, I think it's a gift to see the world in a new way, to get out of your daily rut. And this is one tool that I saw an organization use to sort of help in this reframing challenge. So they start with a challenge, and then they ask the typical marketing laddering question, this matters because of what? And they start mapping it out. You could do this on Google Sheets if you wanted, and start to get that important. And then it leads you to a different way to solve problems. And they would apply this in a sales process. They would apply this into how they're doing business today, just to think about the world in a different way and reframe the way you present ideas. And I thought this is so clever. It's just a nice way to make use of this challenging time. So if you'd ask me of like what's going to happen moving forward, I think some of the great things that will happen is that this crisis has forced us to focus on the important things. One important thing is the importance of making connection with people, making that emotional connection. I could hear it in the things that you talked about earlier, about spending time to do that. Another thing that I think the crisis has done is introduced us some tools to a way that we can be more efficient with our time. You know, send the customer a pizza and we'll talk about your problem. Maybe 2 out of 3 meetings will be virtual now, and we'll meet that way. But for new customers or for big customers or at critical points in project, we'll still meet in person, and we'll have that emotional connection that actually helps us do business together. It's going to cause us to think about the structure of the way we present or the way we interact with each other. And the final thing I'd say is I think it's really, really critical that's going to happen is we should use this time to reflect on how we present and frame ideas. I think getting out of the day-to-day helps us see the world in a different way. And we should use this time to put some structure around that and think about how we'd like to come back together and frame ideas. For us, I see all sorts of different possibilities in the way we teach. I expect a lot more experiential learning. I see students being able to get out into companies. I see salespeople be able to interact with their customers in different ways. And one of the things I'd maybe, just given the time, I was going to suggest we go to breakout groups, but why don't we just stay together? I'd love to hear some people talk about, as you see us coming out of this COVID crisis, what are the 1 or 2 actions that you could focus on as a company that you can really put yourself in a position to thrive? And maybe you could even pick up on something that you'd like to develop so that you're in the right position moving forward. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how you can get yourself in the best position going forward.
So feel free to just take yourself off mute and jump in, or you can type to me in chat. And if you have other questions, feel free to jump in.
I'll just offer one quick thought, and that is that a clarity on the top-down strategy. I think with all this time, and we've talked about some of the disconnectedness, an opportunity just to reconfirm that we're all working on the right things, or maybe not, and just that work of getting back on the same page, I think could be really helpful, and maybe bring everybody together into the the next phase.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. Other thoughts on how you can position your company going forward? Maybe even sharing a success story, things that you'd like to build on from where you've been.
I guess
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah. Is that Carl?
I would and we've sort of broken off into our own into the market.
Maybe you could type in chat.
Sorry. No, the challenge of getting the marketing and sales function close back together again, I think, is something that companies that are going to gain an advantage coming out of the crisis are going to be able to do it in a lot of ways.
So we're going to have to work on your connection. Okay.
So another advantage post-crisis is that
There you go. Right. Mhm.
it's hard to break up when you're in person. I'd be curious to hear if anyone has thoughts on what they're going to do to create that right message coming out of the crisis in terms of getting the organization all on the same page. I know we talk about that all the time at Darden. I've heard other companies talk about that. I wonder if anyone would share something with that.
I mean, Tom, I think we've seen a greater use of some internal sentiment surveys, to the point around listening that was made earlier. We've seen a couple pulses of surveys of how folks are doing. And I think based on that, you can develop a set of actions that are specific and customized to where your group's at.
Do you have any themes, Lou, that you'd share with that?
For us, again, going through integration challenges, a lot of it is, knowing where to get information to execute work processes that may have changed. And I think, each business unit has some unique challenges that they're facing based on where they're at with the capacity, some being in sold out conditions. So, aligning the organization around where the effort should be directed more for, share gain versus value capture, et cetera, has been one of our kind of poignant challenges right now.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, expanding on Lou's comments there on the surveys, if we've learned anything from our surveys, it's that we have a very broad employee base in their comfort zone, right, and where they are. And I think every company right now, we're all trying to put policies or procedures in place and in a time where it probably doesn't fit, right? I mean, I think personally, I think flexibility is going to be key. You give your employees the flexibility to go see customers when they're comfortable, to meet in person when everyone's comfortable without pressure. And I think we'll all have to accept that there's probably going to be a small percentage of our workforce that take advantage of that stay home and don't go to work when they could have, don't go visit customers when they could have, don't put in the full effort, but that's going to boil to the surface anyway, right? If they do that over the next year, to put a policy in place that says you can't visit customers when people want to, or customers want to see them, or to say, hey, you have to, and chase employees away that aren't comfortable, that are working from home anyway. I think flexibility is really the key, and from the results of our surveys, to say, yeah, you might get taken advantage of a little bit, but that the gain is so much better, higher than the downside.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, James. And if you think about, what we've heard today, people are all over the place about whether they like the environment, don't like the environment. So you need that flexibility to meet people where they are. And it's, it's really hard. You might get taken advantage of, on the margin by a few people, but on the whole, I think that really helps. I think that's a great insight. Go ahead. Well, why don't we, I see that we're just about at time. I want to be respectful of where people are. If there's one parting thought that I could give the group, I think over the next 4 or 5 months, as we move into a more normal, whatever the new normal world would be, I would encourage you to think about how you can develop a focused plan around 1 or 2 things that you think are really important to get done to focus your organization in a post-COVID world, and put together a learning plan that makes that happen. I think it energizes people, gets people excited about what the future would be. Spending time together, learning together is a great way to forge that emotional connection. And I love the ideas that people have shared today, the themes that have been brought out, and I think you can rely on some of the things that you do so well in a sales and marketing organization to make this a smooth transition and lead the way for the company. So I just appreciate the time to spend with you this morning, and look forward to being with you for the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Tom. I really appreciate that. And if will you be joining us at 4 during the social after?
I will try to do that. I'm going to try. I might have to move some things around to make that work in my schedule today, but I'm going to see what I can do.
I was looking for opportunities if people thought of something they wanted to ask you, that they might be able to find you and be able to talk through this platform. So, but if not, they also know that they'll get their email addressed for you, and they can send you a note. So thanks so much for this. I really enjoyed that you modeled the behavior by having us talk to each other and get comfortable. So I don't think that all the time, those of us that are engineers and scientists think about doing that. So just that it improves things when you get to know people. So thanks so much for all these great, the data is great, the modeling was great, and making it very thoughtful for us all as we go back. Thanks a lot. And so I'll say goodbye to you and remind everyone that we're back together at noon. The Zoom window will stay open the whole time. We may just go quiet as we try to make sure that everybody is up and running. So we might just let you all sit aside there. But if you would like to talk with each other, we're going to leave this window open. And if you understand how that works, that means you can go into the chat window and you can pull down someone's name from participants and you can say hello to them directly if you like. So feel free to have a conversation and say hello while we're off, and we'll see you again at noon. Thanks again, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.